Okay, let's talk about the crash. You know the one. That intense, out-of-nowhere craving, or that emotional nosedive after a moment of pleasure that just leaves you feeling totally drained. It's a super frustrating cycle. But what if I told you it's not really about you? It's about your brain.
I mean, really, does it ever feel like you're not fully in the driver's seat? You know you shouldn't want that thing, whatever it is, but the pull is so strong it feels like some other force is calling the shots. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on exactly what that force is.
And this right here is at the heart of the problem. For way too long, we've chalked up cravings and addiction to a moral failing, a simple lack of willpower. But that perspective, as we're about to see, completely misses the powerful biological story that's unfolding inside our heads.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to bust that myth of willpower. Then we'll break down the three-stage addiction cycle that's running on a loop. After that, we'll dive into the fascinating science of your brain's balancing act, see how these cravings can become totally automatic, and finally, we'll talk about how to reframe this whole experience.
All right, let's start with this huge shift in thinking. That feeling of being out of control, it's not a sign that you're weak. It's a signal that a really powerful neurobiological process is at work. So check this out. This number tells a pretty compelling story. Take alcohol, for example. More than half of American adults drink, right? But only about 10% end up developing an addiction. Now, if it were all just a matter of making bad choices, wouldn't that number be way, way higher? This gap points to something deeper going on, something biological.
And this is it. The science is becoming crystal clear. While our environment and social lives definitely matter, the engine driving this whole cycle is rooted in our brain's chemistry. So we're shifting the conversation from one about character to one about biology.
So what does this biological process actually look like? Well, researchers have mapped it out, and it's a predictable three-stage cycle. You can almost think of it like a program that's just running in the background of your mind.
It all starts with the part that feels good, right? Stage 1, the binge or intoxication. This is that initial rush, that hit of pleasure or relief you get. It's the reward that kicks the entire cycle into motion.
But we all know that high doesn't last. Stage 2 is the inevitable crash. Your brain flips into a state of withdrawal and you're hit with anxiety, irritability, just this general feeling of blah. Scientists actually have a word for it: dysphoria. It's what happens when the pleasure starts to fade.
And that crash leads directly into stage 3, the craving. Now that your brain is in that negative state, it starts desperately looking for an escape hatch. And notice this critical shift. The motivation isn't really about seeking pleasure anymore. It's about finding relief from the discomfort of the crash. And here you can see the whole loop in action. The craving from stage 3 pushes you back to stage 1 for relief. That binge then causes the stage 2 crash, which then fuels the stage 3 craving all over again. It becomes this self-perpetuating cycle that just gets stronger every time it goes around.
Okay, but why does the crash even have to happen? Why can't we just have the good part? To answer that, we have to understand one of the brain's most basic jobs, which scientists explain with something they call the opponent process theory.
See, at its core, your brain is an absolute master of balance. It's constantly working to maintain this stable internal state called homeostasis. It doesn't like extreme highs, it doesn't like extreme lows, it just wants to stay right there in the middle, in its neutral zone.
So when you introduce something that creates a big high, we'll call that the A process. Your brain basically sounds the alarms. It goes, whoa, we are way off balance. And it immediately launches an opposing reaction, the B process, to pull you back down. That B process is the crash. It's your brain actively creating negative feelings to counteract the high and get back to its happy place.
Honestly, the best way to picture it is like a pendulum. Every hard push into pleasure creates an equal and opposite swing back into pain. And the more you do it, the more your brain adapts. That B process, that swing back into the crash, actually gets stronger and faster over time. Your brain gets better and better at predicting the high and counteracting it more aggressively.
And this brings us to a huge, crucial insight. When you're in the grip of a really intense craving, you're not just chasing a good feeling. You're trying to escape the very real, very uncomfortable feeling of that B process your brain has created. In other words, craving isn't desire. It's relief-seeking. It's a biological mission to escape a negative state.
But it gets even crazier, because this whole process builds on itself and gets even more powerful. The cycle doesn't just happen after you do something. Over time, your brain becomes an expert predictor, and the whole thing just goes on autopilot.
This is something called cue reactivity.
Your brain is a fantastic learning machine, It starts to associate everything related to that high, the sight of a certain food, the sound of a phone notification, even the time of day with the reward. These things all become triggers, or cues.
And here is the absolutely wild part. Your brain gets so good at anticipating the high that just seeing the cue is enough for it to launch the B process, the crash, ahead of time. This is why you can suddenly feel anxious and irritable for seemingly no reason until you realize you just drove past your favorite coffee shop. The craving is the feeling of a crash that is already started.
And this isn't just a theory. We can literally see it happening. These brain scans show the physical reality of it all. The different colors show changes in brain activity after nicotine use. And what the research shows is that just the cues associated with smoking can start to light up these very same brain circuits, creating a craving you can actually see on a scan.
So after all that, what are we supposed to do? How do we handle these moments? Well, just understanding the biology is the first massive step. It gives us a powerful new way to see our own experience, one that replaces judgment with knowledge. And this is the foundation of what we're calling the crash reset. If you take one thing away from this, let it be this. That awful feeling, that desperate craving, it is not evidence that you are weak or that you're broken. It's the predictable, mechanical action of a brain trying to maintain balance. It is a biological process, not a moral one.
And that realization shows us the way forward. Trying to white-knuckle it or shame yourself into stopping is like trying to fight that pendulum with your bare hands. It's exhausting and it doesn't work. The real work, the reset, is about learning to regulate your own nervous system. It's about teaching your body how to survive that low without doing something destructive. You can do this by just naming the state, literally saying to yourself, this is a craving, this is the B process, and that creates distance. Or using simple tools like breathing exercises. Even just setting a timer and telling yourself, I will not try to fix this feeling for just 10 minutes, can be enough to ride out the wave.
So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. If this incredibly powerful experience is a predictable biological loop, not a character flaw, how does that change the conversation? How can we start to shift from a mindset of shame and discipline to one of compassion and regulation, not just for ourselves, but for others too?